In my main channel segment, I talked about how it's just so interesting how the media mistakes tend to benefit Democrats all the time. They don't give Trump and the Republicans the benefit of the doubt. I don't think they necessarily should, but they do give the benefit of the doubt to Democrats and to stories that hurt Republicans. That they probably shouldn't do if they're not going to do the same for Republicans. They should treat everyone the same and give us the facts and inform us. That's all I care about. What's the truth? What's the data that's going to help us progress this country and move forward and solve our problems? Now, here's the funny part. You may have noticed that when these fake news stories comes out, it's always negative about Trump, and the day later they correct it. It really does help the Democrats who are now calling for impeachment of Kavanaugh. Check out this story from the Daily Caller. Brian Stelter blames conservatives for trying to tear down CNN's spy story, ignoring that the New York Times actually did that. And there it is. So the New York Times fact-checks CNN and says, you're wrong. Look, they basically made the story up as far as I can tell. But the New York Times says it's not true. For those that aren't familiar, basically, CNN claimed that Trump was about to out some spy or something like that. So the CIA had to extract him. They said Trump was going to leak information or something, or he did. New York Times reported the extraction was planned before Trump even took office. Now, Jim Sciutto of CNN is standing by his story, and they're blaming conservatives. Are you kidding me? The New York Times fact-checked you, CNN. It's no one's fault but your own. They ignore the New York Times, and once again, it all flows in the same direction. That the fault, the lies, the smears, certainly it must be conservatives. They ignore the New York Times. They ignore the facts. Take a look at this. This story was fact-checked by the New York Times and I believe the Washington Post. Now take a look at what happened with Kavanaugh. 2 books. Molly Hemingway's saying Kavanaugh was basically falsely accused. There's very little evidence. And the New York Times staff members. And what does the media do? They ignore the evidence when it comes from the conservatives. Then, when the evidence comes from the New York Times, they still blame conservatives. Even though the conservatives aren't the ones who presented the evidence. They ignore the evidence in the Kavanaugh story. They blame conservatives for wrongdoing in this story. Let's read from the Daily Caller. Before we get started, however, go to timcast.com/donate to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address you can send things to. The best thing you can do is share this, and I'll tell you why. You may have heard me say this before, but I'll stress it now for this story. YouTube props up CNN. CNN does not produce content for a YouTube audience. They produce their trashy news garbage and then cut it up and upload it to YouTube. And YouTube says, great, and they recommend it. Then real creators who have been dedicated to this platform get pushed down. It's called deranking. And that's what I face, especially when I criticize CNN. So here's what you can do. They can suggest whoever they want. And we've seen the data. Even David Pakman, a progressive, shows that Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN get propped up. He and I get knocked down. We're both independent, commentators on YouTube. Why? That's not fair. It's not fair. But I'll tell you what. They can recommend whoever they want. Fine. I get it. That's business. It's the market. You know what you can do? Share this video. You know why? They can never stop that. Unless they outright ban my channel. But if you can take that link and post it anywhere, then the power of all of the people who view this video sharing it is 100 times more powerful than YouTube's deranking could ever be. Seriously, videos like this tend to get 100, 150,000 views. Could you imagine if every single person shared it? Take that, YouTube. You can't stop the content people want. Let's read. Sorry for that longer rant, but I appreciate the support. I really do. CNN's Brian Stelter and Jim Sciutto accused Trump supporters and the conservative media of trying to tear down a CNN report that the CIA extracted a Kremlin spy because of concerns about President Donald Trump's handling of classified information. The CNN correspondents ignored it. It was reporting from the New York Times and Washington Post that undercut CNN's claim. Quote, many pro-Trump allies and commentators tried to tear down that reporting and say it might not be true. Do you stand by that reporting now a week later? Stelter asked Sciutto on reliable sources. 100%, Sciutto replied. We would not have gone there if we didn't trust the source's involvement, information, and level of involvement in those discussions. I don't know what that misquote is. Well, let me just stress, I am certainly no pro-Trump individual. But many people may ask, Tim, don't you make a lot of videos that defend Trump? Right, the joke is stop making me defend the guy. It's a really weird position to be in. I wouldn't vote for him. I'm not a fan of his domestic policy. I'm not a fan of reappropriating funds from other places to fulfill his border promise. But the Democrats certainly haven't offered me up any alternatives. They just call it immoral, and Beto says tear the wall down. Not a fan of most of his foreign policy. I like that he met with Kim Jong-un at the DMZ. I like that he canceled the strike on Iran, noting that he himself, I say that, and I know it's kind of a beating a dead horse for most of you who follow my commentary and hear me say this all the time, but I have to stress this because most people who watch my videos are not return viewers. They watch like 5 or 6 videos per week or less. Some people will watch 10 per month. That means they don't always hear me mention this. The point is, they don't like the fact that I, as an independent commentator, will call them out. They try and frame it as if it was pro-Trump allies and commentators. I made a video highlighting that the CIA slammed CNN over their fake news. I follow the facts. I looked at the New York Times, the Washington Post, and a statement from the CIA. I didn't personally come out and accuse them of being liars without evidence. I saw the evidence. I called it out. They want to slam and smear even people like me. When I went to the White House summit, President Trump invited a bunch of people. Vice called me right-wing. Here's the best part. About a week and a half later, when I was ranting and raving about how much I think Tulsi Gabbard is amazing and why I support her and have donated to her, they called me a lefty. Why? Because they can't simultaneously claim right-wingers are supporting Tulsi Gabbard, though they do try. They do. They don't want to say that Trump was willing to invite a critic of him. It's true. I'm in an interesting position because the media smears Trump so much simply by being like, Orange Man is not that bad. They're calling you a supporter. Can you believe how insane that is? When have I ever made a video saying explicitly that I would support what Trump is doing as a whole? Now, I can credit things I like that he's done, like I just did. I can condemn the bad things he's done, but I would never vote for the guy. And Trump, the White House, invited me. And there was another person, Bill Ottman of Minds, who is in no way a Trump supporter, who was also invited. Not so much a critic, because he's more of a tech guy, but I'm definitely critical of Trump, just not to the degree the Orange Man bad press is. For the most part, why would I join in on the chorus, and it's all they produce all day and night? But they don't want to admit it. That's why it's so important when I highlight these things. They don't want to admit that conservatives actually do entertain their critics. They allow them to have a conversation and they debate them. This is the weird position that I'm in right now. That I can see CNN published fake news according to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the CIA. Well, I don't know what other sources you need besides that. So what do? The people who are trying to tear us down are Trump supporters and pro-Trump commentators. Okay. Maybe they don't mean me. Maybe they just ignore me and leave me out of the equation. The point is, they ignore the fact that the mainstream press is knocking them down. Why? It's a hard target. It's an easy target to be like, oh, it's just Trump supporters. The New York Times did the same thing. Trump allies are trying to smear our journalists. They can't admit that when it comes to political debate, the left is much less willing to have conservatives on, and conservatives love to debate. Love, love, love it. And I can't tell you why, but I will say this. Brian Stelter has had on many people to talk about YouTube, commentary, politics, algorithms, strangely, and he's DM'd me personally. He didn't have me on. He doesn't have me on, and I praised him, a week or two ago when he criticized Brian Karem. I said good on him for calling out the unprofessional behavior. He got mad at me when I called him out over his Trump sweaty, soaking wet thing. I don't want to get into that whole issue. But ignore me. He doesn't have to have me on his show. I don't care. Why doesn't Brian Stelter have anyone on to push back against these narratives? Why is that Brian Stelter only ever goes in one direction? I wonder why. I have had progressives on this channel more than once. I hosted David Pakman. I hosted several progressive journalists. I don't usually host people. Interestingly, I don't know if you guys know who Will Chamberlain is. He's the guy who runs Human Events. For some reason, I just had him on several times because I think he's a savvy guy who has kind of a, similar but counter. He's not super far right or anything. He's like, regular old center-right conservative-ish. For some reason, he's been on my main channel a lot. But I have absolutely tried to get more progressives to come on and do interviews and conversations than anyone else. I wonder why Brian Stelter only has conversations and critiques that flow in one direction. And here's your evidence, okay? If the New York Times can claim CNN is wrong, and then instead of pointing out it was the New York Times, and they point the finger at Trump commentators, you can see they're biased. They have no intention of telling you the truth. Now listen, I think I point in one direction for the most part too, right? That's fair. But I'm absolutely willing to wait for verified green check marks from websites using a third-party fact-checking source, and I'm willing to wait until the dust settles before I rush forward with my story. So I wonder, if they want to have someone on, why don't they bring on people who counter their opinion, and why do they ignore the New York Times? I just helped sponsor an event that had many people I disagree with speak. We offered up high-profile, not high-profile, we offered up headlining positions to progressives, intentionally. There's something interesting about intellectual dark web, the centrists, and modern conservatives in that, for the most part, they are trying to and want to platform their political opponents for conversation. They don't. They just pass the buck and point the finger. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Podcast every day at 6:30 p.m. on all podcast platforms. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next time.